Hello everyone, I am Samarth Bhatt. Welcome to you all to your second lecture of this limit camp. Hope you are enjoying now. This lecture will be pretty exciting in the sense that throughout your life you've been learning about numbers and various types of number systems, and today we'll be expanding that to something that we call complex numbers. Okay, so first of all I will try to give you motivation through the concept called field theory. I will be just defining fields and then trying to give you the motivation as to why we should expand the number system. So this is the basic gist of the first part of my two lectures, and after that we will be trying to cover some applications of this and its usefulness. We will address that. So first of all, let's look at all the number systems that we are already aware of. The counting numbers 1, 2, 3 and so on. This set is what we are all aware of to be the set of natural numbers. Adding another 0 to this will make it the set of whole numbers. But let's not write that, because we know that just if you add the additive inverses to the set of natural numbers, then along with 0 you will get the set of integers, that is minus 2, minus 1, 0, 1, 2 and so on. And then you have the rational numbers. Slowly as you went on in school, you expanded them to fractions. Fractions are any numbers that is said are up from p by q, where p and q belongs to integers. Great. Then later, as you maybe it's introduced this way as square roots, and you slowly expanded this number system by adding irrational numbers to something called the set of real numbers. What is the set of real numbers? I mean, we didn't define it yet, and in school maybe you haven't yet defined it, but if you want to say it in very simple terms, then we will call it the set of those numbers that we've learnt about till now. Great. So this is how much we are already aware of right now. These are the number systems that we know about. Now, until you knew the operation of square root, it was all fine. When you divided two real numbers where the denominator was not 0, the number by which you are dividing is not 0, it was in real numbers. When you added two numbers, real numbers, it was in the set of real numbers. When you subtracted them also, it was in the real set of real numbers. So the closure property was satisfied over here. But then suddenly when you were solving quadratic equations, or just while pondering, while exploring the operation of taking square roots, when you took the square root of minus 1, suddenly it was not a real number. There was no real number whose square was minus 1. Right, so now we were stuck. This is just one maybe a hint to the motivation, but the motivation I shall be providing, as I already said, through field theory. So let's go to that next. So let's go afresh right now. Let's learn this as a totally algebraic quantity. We'll be learning about fields now. Okay. You might have already learnt about sets. Sets are a collection of well-defined objects. So in set theory, you might have learnt about set. It's an algebraic quantity. It's a quantity. It's a collection. Now, if you add some structure to that set, you will get what we call as a field. So field, to put in simple terms, let's look at it as just a set with the property of addition and with the property of multiplication. We will not deal with the concept of fields abstractly, but we will just look at it in terms of the set of real numbers. In the set of real numbers, it's a set obviously, and if you look at addition and multiplication, for the set of real numbers, along with addition and multiplication to satisfy conditions to become a field, the addition and multiplication properties, operations must satisfy some properties, namely commutativity, of both addition and multiplication, associativity, of both addition and multiplication, and then distributivity, this special property says that for the way we have defined addition and multiplication, a times b plus c must be equal to a times b plus a times c. And then some properties like inverse and identity. That means every number should have an additive inverse and a multiplicative inverse, and the properties of addition and multiplication must have identities. So what does that mean? What does it mean to say that the property of addition and multiplication have identity? It means to say that there should exist some number x such that a plus x is equal to a for all a, and we indeed have such a number, that is x equal to 0. Similarly, for multiplication, it says there should exist a y such that b times y equal to b for all b belonging to that set of real numbers in this case. And indeed we have even such y, that is y equal to 1. So there is an identity for both addition and multiplication. And inverses, existence of inverse means that for every a in the set there should be a b such that a plus b is equal to the additive identity. In this case it is 0. And inverse in multiplication similarly means that for every a there exists a b such that a into b is equal to 1, that is the multiplicative identity. Hence it satisfies all these properties and set of real numbers qualifies to be a field. Now we will extend this concept to polynomials and then come to the motivation of why we have to expand the set of real numbers to the set of complex numbers. So now we will be learning about how fields play a role in polynomials. We already had a lecture on polynomials, but now we will look at it in a field point of view, from the field point of view. So how do we, let's look at a specific class of polynomials, say Rx. This, as you may have already seen, is just means the set of polynomials whose coefficients come from the set of real numbers, set of all polynomials. So this is a special class of polynomials. What we want to do is just do the following observation. Suppose you randomly take a polynomial from this set, say x square minus 1. What are the roots of this polynomial? Let's solve for them. If x square minus 1 is 0, x minus 1 times x plus 1 is equal to 0. This would imply that x is either 1 or minus 1. Great, cool. Why did I do this? This is simple math. I did this to make the following observation that both the roots belong to the set of real numbers. Yeah, you'd be like, what's the big thing in that? But say we look at some other polynomial, x square plus 1 equal to 0, x square plus 1, and we solve for the roots. In this case, there are no real numbers for which the no real numbers for which x square plus 1 equal to 0. But every second degree polynomial should have two roots, right? You might have already seen a teaser of this in school or somewhere, that there is a special number I or something, but we'll come to that. So this is the basic point. We want to extend this set of real numbers, just extend it such that it is still a field, but every polynomial of that field, that is, say we extend R to a special field K, then every polynomial of Kx has roots in K, and all the roots are in K, and there are roots for it. So that is pretty much the motivation I wanted to give you, although it's not so rigorous, but this is the motivation. Now we will I will give you a construction of addition of elements, that from R we add elements to make it a bigger set, and then I'll show you that it is an algebraically closed field. Now that is the term that means exactly what I told you up till now, that any polynomial of this, if field f is said to be algebraically closed if every polynomial of fx, that is any polynomial taking coefficients from f, has roots in f. That is the whole point of algebraic closure. So then, from using that concept, as I said, we will try to extend R to a field K which is algebraically closed, and I will give you that construction, and then later we will be calling that as complex numbers. So yeah, this is pretty much the motivation. Now I will be giving you the construction. I will be giving you a construction, and then I will leave it to you to check that it's a closed set. It's rather simple. Now I will be giving you a construction, and without proof we'll say that it will be the closure of R, and it will be a closure of R implies that it's a closed field. That is, every polynomial of that field will have roots in that field. So the construction is as follows: every element of that set, which we call as C, every element will be of the form A plus IB, where A and B belong to real numbers. All such possible numbers constitute this field. We will see how these behave after I define the operations of addition and multiplication, which will be consistent with the operations of addition and multiplication with the set of real numbers. So coming back, A plus IB. What did I mean by A plus IB? What is this I? I is that number which we define to square is minus 1. So I square is minus 1. I cubed is minus I to the 4 is 1. And I is of course I. Let's just write this for the sake of it looking nice. So this is I's behavior. Let's understand more of I by looking at some other complex numbers of A plus IB, this form. As I already said, complex numbers are the numbers of the form A plus IB where I is the square root of minus 1. Let's understand this a bit more by giving some terms, defining some terms. So A here is called the real part of the complex number, and IB here is defined as the imaginary part of the complex number. So this total, some combination of a real part and imaginary part, gives you a complex number. So later you might see the motivation of this when we try to represent this in some geometric form. But yeah, for now this is called the real part and this is called the imaginary part. This is very crucial while we define operations on this. So as we said in the motivation to the construction of complex numbers, that it will be like an extension of a field from real numbers. So the definition of addition, multiplication must be consistent with the definition of addition and multiplication for complex numbers. So how do we define the addition of two complex numbers? Say a plus ib is z1 and z2 is a plus ib. C plus id. Also, it's very although elementary but important to note. You say two complex numbers are equal when their real part and imaginary parts, corresponding real parts and imaginary parts are equal. So a plus ib equals c plus id, where a, b, c, d are real numbers, if and only if a equal to c and b equal to b. Although it's elementary, it's important to note. So coming back to the definition of addition in complex numbers, say z1 is a plus ib and z2 is c plus id. Then you define z1 plus z2 as many of you might have guessed, it seems it's a very natural definition, a plus c plus I times b plus 1. Just component wise addition. Nice. This is our definition of addition for complex numbers. Let's just have a look at some properties of addition. So one very natural one that we have to check is whether it's closed. That is, whether this also is a complex number. Although it may look obvious, but we have to check it. So for it to be a complex number, it should be of the form a plus ib, where a and b are real numbers. So this is our new a prime plus I times this is our new b prime. So yeah, it is of the form a plus ib, and so it is closed. Closure property satisfies. Now we have to check commutativity. Commutativity means z1 plus z2 must be equal to z2 plus z1. So if this is z1 plus z2, where z1 is this and z2 is this, z2 plus z1 will be c plus a plus I times d plus b. So because addition in real numbers is commutative, that is c plus a equal to a plus c, and again b plus d is d plus b. Component wise they are the same, so z2 plus z1 is the same as z1 plus z2. So it's also commutative. Similarly, you can verify even associativity. Let's just do that quickly. Z1, I'll just clean up before we go to that. Say Z1 is A1 plus IB1, Z2 is A2 plus IB2, and Z3 is A3 plus IB3. So first I want to find Z1 plus Z2 plus Z3, that is equal to Z1 plus Z2 plus Z3, as you can see, is A2 plus A3 plus I times B2 plus B3, A2 plus A3 plus I times B2 plus B3. Again, this is a complex number, so you add Z1 in this complex number using the same definition. So this is A1 plus IB1, so A1 adds to this. Now since A1 adds to this, it is A1 plus A2 plus A3. Now because addition is associative in real numbers, it will be A1 plus A2 plus A3. A1 plus A2 plus A3. That is, you can add it anyway because it's associative. Plus I times, again for similar reasoning, B1 plus B2 plus B3 is B1 plus B2 plus B3. Similarly, if you just verify Z1 plus Z2 plus Z3, you will get the same value. You can just do that by yourself. So this shows that addition is also associative. We have closure, commutativity and associativity. That's good. Next we go to define another important property, another important operation on complex number, which is multiplication. Once we do this, we can check whether these definitions still hold true in real numbers. So great. So how do we go back? Now we define multiplication. Again, it's a very intuitive definition. A plus IB times C plus ID is defined just like your normal distributive multiplication, where you think of I as square root of minus 1. So it's AC minus, because IB into ID is I squared BD, which is minus BD, I squared is minus 1, plus IB times C plus A times ID. So it's I times BC plus AD. So yeah, the product of A plus IB and C plus ID is defined as AC minus BD plus I times BC plus AD. You just define it this way, but as you understood that it is just like distributive law, you can think of it that way. So this is how you define multiplication. Great. Now let's just check again those properties for multiplication which we checked for addition, that is closure, commutativity and associativity. So first of all, is it closed? Say this is a complex number, this is a complex number. Is this a complex number? Is it a number of the form A plus IB where A and B are real numbers? A, C, B, D are real numbers. So this operation is a real number, will give you a real number. B, C, A, D is a real number, so BC plus AD will also be a real number. So this is also a real number. So a real number plus I times a real number, complex number. So hence we have the property of closure. Great. Now that we have the property of closure for multiplication, we will be we'll try to prove the properties of commutativity and associativity. So first let us prove commutativity. So we'll call this Z1 and call this Z2. We know what A plus IB times C plus ID is, right? So let's just find what is Z2 times Z1, which is C plus ID times A plus IB. Although it may look very obvious or trivial or unnecessary to do all this, we should, because it is a new operation that we have defined and we are not yet sure whether it will work out or not. And although it is very elementary or intuitive, it is very necessary to do this, because otherwise we won't be having the fundamental the elementary intuition that you have while doing computations with complex numbers. Like commutativity is very necessary. So let's continue. So you again do just like distributive law. Just like distributive law, but that is what we took as the intuition to define the multiplication. So you can either do the distributive law or just recall this definition of multiplication. So let's just check with the definition of multiplication, because that is what we have to check with. So if it is A plus IB and C plus ID, then it is AC minus BD plus I times BC plus AD. So here we are swapping A with C and B with D. That's all that's happening. So we get CA minus DB plus I times DA plus CB. Okay, great. So this CA minus DB, because now here the multiplication and subtraction are for real numbers, we can rearrange it and come back to AC minus BD, because commutativity and commutativity of multiplication for real numbers. And then again, similarly here, if you do AD and BC and just commutativity of addition, you will get back the same result. Hence, this times this is the same as this times this, because component wise they are the same quantities. So thereby we get commutativity for multiplication. Great. Now we have to do associativity. Although this is elaborate, I shall just do it quickly. I suggest you all to pause the video and check the associativity for yourself. Next, we have commutativity and associativity and closure for the two operations that we've defined. Now, if you recall in the field definition, we also had properties of inverse and identity. So let's just check that, whether there's an inverse. First, let's go with identity. Is there an additive identity? So just take the complex number Z1. Is there a number, a complex number Z, such that Z1 plus Z is Z1 for all Z1 complex? That is, all numbers of the form A plus IB, where A and B are reals. Yes, if you take Z defined as 0 plus 0I, okay, which we'll be calling as 0 for reasons which we'll find out later, as Z, then any A plus IB plus 0 plus 0I will be A plus 0, which is A, because just real numbers adding, plus IB plus 0I, which is again B plus 0 times I, so this is IB. So A plus IB, A plus I. So any A plus IB I take, I add 0 plus 0I, I get A plus IB. So 0 plus 0I is the additive identity. Now 0 plus 0I, because the imaginary part is 0, because that is the thing that is extra, right? I mean, real part we already had in real numbers. So because the imaginary part is 0, we will just call it 0 and just look at the real part. So this is our normal number 0. Great. We still haven't checked whether it's an extension of real numbers, so I'm hesitating to call it 0 right now, but I'm just giving you the intuition of why it should be 0. Now we've checked whether we've got the additive identity. Let's just check the multiplicative identity. So A plus IB times 1 plus 0I. Just take this. This is the additive multiplicative identity. The number 1, real number 1. But let's just have this for now. So we can either check with the definition, or as I gave you the intuition, you can just use the distributive law. You just multiply this, you will get A plus IB plus 0 times A times I plus 0 times I times B. So just simple intuition, if you use or use the definition, either way you will get A plus IB. So because this A plus IB was arbitrary, you take any A plus IB multiplied by 1 plus 0I, the one, real number 1, you will get A plus IB. So this is the multiplicative identity. Now let's check for inverses. Is there an inverse always in the set of complex numbers for both the operations addition and multiplication? What does having an inverse mean? So for every Z1, that is A plus IB, there should be a Z2 such that Z1 plus Z2 is 0 plus 0I. The additive identity. As you can already see, a natural construction of Z2 is minus A plus I times minus B. Why is this a complex number is one question, and by the definition of addition, when we add it, do we get 0 plus 0I is another. So let's just check whether it's a complex number or not. It's a real number, A is a real number, minus A is also a real number. So the real part, great, is real. And B is a real number, so negativity is also a real number. So it's a real number plus I times real number, complex number, so great. So there exists an inverse, Now we are checking whether it adds up to 0. So a plus minus a 0, component wise you have to add. So we get 0 as real part, imaginary part. B plus minus b 0. So 0 I. So great, you constructed an additive inverse. So for every a plus ib we have an additive inverse. Similarly, if you go to construct multiplicative identity, you need z1 times z2 is equal to 1 plus 0y. Now that's a thing to think about, because a plus ib you have and you're not really sure if you can always find, you can construct where 1 plus 0y will be. So let's so you're not really sure whether you can find a number z2 such that z1 times z2 is 1 plus 0y. So let's just assume there exists something like this, and this is something shady we are doing here. I'm just trying to give an intuitive construction but not really a proof. Later we can prove it, because once we have, if there exists, then proving would just be multiplying and checking and proving that it's a complex number. So let's just have this is 1 plus 0y. So let's just remove this if no, let's just have it, because here we will be looking at a very significant part of solving many such complex equations. By that I mean equations with complex numbers. So when you multiply, you get AC minus BD plus I times BC plus AD, which should be equal to 1 plus 0I. This means BC, again, how I told you, if two complex numbers are equal, they should be component wise equal, right? This is why I kept this 0i, because now we know that BC plus AD must be equal to 0 and AC minus BD must be equal to 1. So I'll just erase this and just write those two equations. BC plus AD equal to 0 and AC minus BD equal to 1. Now you can either solve for C and D or just look at the fact that this works. C equal to A by square root of A square plus B square and D equal to minus B by square root of A square plus B square. So coming to the part of multiplicative inverse, I will just give you a construction and you can later think about why this construction works. So what do we mean by multiplicative inverse again? That for every a plus ib we have to show that there exists a c plus id such that a plus ib times c plus id is equal to 1 plus 0, which is just the number 1. So if you take c as a by a square plus b square and d as minus b by a square plus b square, let's just say you take this, which means you take c plus id, this thing, plus I times this thing, as the number which you are multiplying this by. Because these both are real, c plus id will be a complex number. So if you multiply a plus ib times a by a square plus b square minus b by a square plus b square, I times, again distributive law, this a times this thing, a square by a square plus b square plus this thing times this thing. So it's I square, a minus, so that makes it plus, and a b square over a square plus b square. And for the imaginary part, I times this plus this times this. So AB by a square plus b square, and it's an a times minus b, so minus ab over a square by b square. So it's not a surprise for me, but as you can see, it neatly cancels off this cancels off to 0 and this cancels off to a square plus b square divided by a square plus b square. So 1 plus 0i. So there you have it. You notice that if you take c as this and d as this, a plus ib times c plus id is 1 plus 0i, and so this is the multiplicative inverse of a plus ib, and because a plus ib was arbitrary, there exists a multiplicative inverse for all the complex numbers other than the case where a square plus b square is 0. Yes, that detail has to be dealt with. As you notice, if a square plus b square is 0, then this definition wouldn't make sense, right? So when is a square plus b square 0? A square plus b square is 0 only if both a and b are 0, right? Because both of these are strictly non-negative. So for their sum to be 0, both of them have to be individually 0. So a is 0 and b is 0, in which case it would be the number 0. So any non-zero number, complex number, has a multiplicative inverse. So great, you have the multiplicative inverse and the additive inverse. So for both the operations, we now have commutativity, closure, associativity, and then we have the identity and inverse property satisfied. Now just the distributive law, if you prove it, it will be a field. It will have satisfied all the field properties. So what do you now? We have to show that z1 plus z1 times z2 plus z3 is equal to z1 times z2 plus z1 times z3. Again, I'm not going to do the computation. You will have to trust me that it will work out, and it works out to be fine. The equality will hold. We have to show whether this is equal. You take any a1, b1s, a1, b1, a2, b2, a3, b3, it will work out, and the distributive law also satisfies. So now there we have all the properties to prove that the set of complex numbers is a field with the addition and multiplication we have defined. So now we have to just see whether for real numbers that satisfies. So what is a real number in the set of complex numbers? A real number corresponds to that number whose imaginary part is 0 and the real part is that real number itself. So suppose you have a real number x, then it corresponds to x plus 0i in the complex number thing. So now we have to see whether the addition and multiplication holds the same way in the definition that we've just defined for complex numbers. So is x plus y plus 0i? So let's just see. So x corresponds to this, y corresponds to this. We need their sum to be x plus y plus this corresponds to this corresponds to this corresponds to x plus y plus 0i. Is this the same as this with the definition we have? Component wise addition, so x plus y plus I times 0 plus 0, which is 0. So yes, indeed they are the same. So the addition is the same when you extend from real numbers to complex numbers. Now let's just check for multiplication, whether multiplication is also multiplication is consistent with the definition of multiplication with complex numbers. So whether x times y corresponds to the product of what these correspond in the complex number. X corresponds to x plus 0i, y corresponds to y plus 0i, their product should correspond to xy plus 0i. What is their product? Again, distributive law, xy plus 0, 0, 0 plus 0i. Again, as you see, they are the same. So even multiplication is consistent with the definition in the multiplication for complex numbers. So we check that it's a field, we check that it's an extension of real numbers because all the elements are there, and also the definition of the two operations that we've defined also are consistent. So this indeed is an extension of the field of real numbers to the field of complex numbers. And now the only leap of faith that you have to take is that every complex polynomial, as I said, was the motivation for the extension in the first place, of degree n has n complex roots. That is something I will not be proving, but that was the motivation for why we defined this new field as an extension of real numbers. Great. Now I'll be looking at how we can represent a complex number in the coordinate axis. It is very intuitive. Again, you might have already guessed as to how I might define it. I might just draw this a little above. What I'll do is I'll call this as the real line. Your number line, standard number line is this. I just draw perpendicular line at 0. And here instead of the real numbers, it's the real numbers times I. Okay, so it's like I, 2I, minus I, 1, 2, the same. Very intuitive definition. So what this makes us, how this makes it easy is that we can represent any complex number as a point on this plane. Any a plus ib I give is a over here and a b over here. So it's just a point. So this is a representation of the complex numbers on the real line, a coordinate plane. So now that we've understood that we can represent the complex number on a Cartesian coordinates, let's assign some properties to the complex number through which we can analyze their behavior and solve problems called modulus and argument. So those are defined on the coordinate, on the complex plane of complex numbers as I have defined previously. So suppose there is a complex number z that is over here and it makes an angle theta, and this is a distance. For z we write it as mod z. So this is what we call as modulus, the distance from the origin to the point that represents the complex number, and theta the argument, the angle it makes. This is the simple intuition. Now we will give it rigorous definition. So for modulus it doesn't change. So but let's try to find it as a formula when you write z as an arbitrary complex number a plus ib. So when z is written as a plus ib, a is this distance by the definition of the complex plane, and b is this height again by the definition. So this makes a 90 degree here. So mod z is quite simply square root of a square plus b square by the Pythagoras theorem. So that is simple. Now theta, there are different cases where we can define theta. So in the definition of the argument, what we try to make sure is that theta always lies between minus pi, that is minus 180 degrees, and plus pi, that is plus 180 degrees. So we try to make sure it lies between minus 180 degrees and plus 180 degrees. We try to make sure that theta lies between minus pi and plus pi, where it could take the value of plus pi and not the value of minus pi. So to try to illustrate this more, I will redraw the figure and explain in different cases for the complex number as to what value the argument of it will take. So if the complex number is in the first quadrant, then this theta will take a value, a positive value, and will be an acute angle, right? So something like 60 degrees or pi by 3. Now if it is in the second quadrant, again you have to go from the positive x-axis in the anti-clockwise direction. It will be an obtuse angle yet positive, something like 120 degrees maybe. But if it lies below, on the negative side of the y-axis, then since we have to go in the clockwise direction, you assign a negative value, say minus 30 degrees maybe, or pi by 6. And similarly for the third quadrant, because it's on the negative side of the y-axis, you assign a negative value but with an obtuse angle value, say minus 120 degree. And if it is on the y-axis, x-axis, but on the negative side, then you give it a value of 180 degrees and not minus 180 degrees, because we are admitting pi but not minus pi. So that is how we define argument and modulus, two very important factors or properties of a complex number. Now we define a conjugate, something that we call a conjugate of a complex number. We define it in the following manner. Again, it's based on the complex plane. If there is a complex number, say z, somewhere on the plane, then the conjugate is defined as the mirror image of the complex number if the x-axis was a mirror. So somewhere here. And we denote it as z bar. It's called the conjugate of z. So how is it special? Let's see. But first, from the definition, what can we say immediately about z bar? As you may already notice that it makes the same yet negative angle with the x-axis. So it has its negative argument. Even if z was on the second quadrant, in the third quadrant it will just make the negative argument. And modulus, which is the distance from the origin to the complex, to the point which represents the complex number, is the same for both the complex number and its conjugate. So mod z and mod z bar. So argument, to just write down the two properties of z, is equal to negative of argument of z bar, mod of z equals mod of z bar. Okay, but if you write z as a plus ib in the form that we are using to define the complex number, then what will z bar look like? So if z is a plus ib, what does that mean? Let's go with that first. It means that this distance is a and this distance is b. So again, this is very obviously true that even this will be b, because it is just the mirror image, and then a is the common component of it on the x-axis. So z bar still has a component of a on the x-axis, but it has a component of b on the negative side of the y-axis. So just by how we defined the complex plane and how complex numbers go on the complex plane, this is a minus ib. So z is a plus ib and z bar is a minus ib. Now we will try to show an interesting result which you will use many times while solving problems, is the following. So if we have a complex number z, a plus ib, then we know its conjugate z bar is a minus ib. Just while wondering, if we multiply z and z bar, we get a plus ib times a minus ib. Again, using the distributive rule or the definition, we get this to be a square plus b square plus abi minus abi. So this is a square plus b square. But we notice something uniquely different about a square plus b square. This is nothing but the square of the modulus of z or z bar, because now we know that both of them have the same modulus. So this is an interesting result that we can just note. Mod z bar square is is equal to mod z square, that is equal to z bar. That's cool. We have a result that we can use to solve problems now. So now that we've defined the conjugate of a complex number, let's look at these few properties that we get immediately. So let's all view this with respect to the complex domain. See, this is z and this is z bar. The first thing it says is the conjugate of z, that is z bar whole bar, is z. So that means the conjugate of this number is z itself. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Okay, but we can also prove this by using the alternative definition that we've had, that is the conjugate of a plus ib is a minus ib. So using this, if we try to prove, we have z bar to be a minus ib if z is a plus ib, and then the conjugate of a minus ib is a minus I of minus b, that is a plus ib. Either way we have the result. So now looking at z plus z bar, if z is a plus ib, then we have z bar to be a minus ib, making their sum equal to 2a, which is exactly 2 times the real part of z. So this is just a notation. Re of z means the real part of z. That is, if z is a plus ib, then re of z is a. Similarly, there's another result, that is z minus z bar. Again, im means the imaginary part. So let's just have a look at that also. If z is a plus ib, we want a plus ib minus a minus ib. So on expansion of this, that is opening the bracket, we get a plus ib minus a plus ib. So the a's cancel and we have 2 times ib. This is exactly the 2 times the imaginary part of z. Next, we have another result, that is the conjugate of the sum or difference of z1 and z2 is the conjugate of the individual ones summed or differentiable. Next, we have another result, which is z1 plus or minus z2 whole conjugate is z1 conjugate plus or minus z2 conjugate. This also you can prove it similarly by just assuming z1 and z2 to be a plus id and c plus id respectively. So I'll leave that to you guys. And next we have another result, that is z1 z2 whole conjugate is z1 conjugate times z2 conjugate. That also we can do by just assuming a plus id and a minus id, writing it in the Cartesian form. So I'll just do this one, a plus id times c plus id whole conjugate is what I need. This is, as it's easy to expand, ac minus bd plus I times bc plus ad whole conjugate, which means we just have to negate the imaginary part, gives us ac minus bd minus I times bc plus ad. This is the left hand side. The right hand side is z1 bar times z2 bar. So that is a minus ib times c minus id. This is equal to, you just have to use a distributive law, a times c minus b times d. Let's just have a plus I times minus bc and minus ad. If you compare this and this, is just the same, so giving us this result. Next we have another interesting result, but I will not give it straight away as result, we'll just try to find it. all of you may have seen this one spectacular result, something that seems rather strange sometime in your mathematical career. E power I pi equal to -1. I mean, this seems rather strange, and most probably many of you have not yet completely understood what is the reason behind which we have this kind of result, or what this even means actually, because at least now we know the meaning of I, that is square root of -1. Pi e1 we knew, but how do you make sense of this whole result? I mean, what is the funda that's happening? So to understand that, today's lecture will be targeted in that direction. You might need a little prerequisites in trigonometry to understand this part of the lecture, but I hope you guys are having some knowledge of trigonometry. If not, you can just try and follow. I'll be giving intuition on the way we go. Okay, so e power I pi is -1. How do we make sense of this? So as we've already seen, one representation of the complex numbers is that the complex plane is represented in terms of something like Cartesian coordinates, the x coordinate and the y coordinate. The next representation that we will be using is something that has to do with polar coordinates. What are polar coordinates? You just look at how far the point is, that is this distance, and what angle it makes with the positive x-axis. You guys might already think of something that some factors or properties of a complex number that we've learned that represent these two values. So this distance we've already learned to be the modulus. Say if this is z, this is mod z, and this is theta, the argument. So say there's a number z, complex number z with mod z as its modulus and theta to be its argument. Then we can just take this result to be just take the result. I'll explain how to make sense of it. I will not give proof of it. I apologize for that, but let's try to make sense of it. Yeah. Z is written as, can be written if is a plus ib and has mod z and theta as its modulus and argument. Then we can write a plus ib as mod z, which is a real number of course, times e to the I theta. This is how e to the I pi, e to the I theta comes. How do we make sense of this? I'll try to explain that now. E power I theta is equal to cos theta plus I sin theta. Now this is the underlying expression that we are using to write this. Now the proof of this is something that, as I said, I won't be giving, but this is the result that we are fundamentally using. E to the I theta is cos theta plus I sin theta. Now how does this give this? So let's not look at it for all the quadrants, although you can try that, taking the complex number in all the quadrants and just look at how it makes sense in every quadrant. In this quadrant, say e to the I theta, if it is cos theta plus I sin theta, then mod z times e to the I theta is mod z times cos theta plus I times mod z times sin theta. What is mod z times cos theta? Now again, here is where we need the trigonometry knowledge. Mod z times cos theta is, if in a right triangle you take the hypotenuse and multiply by the cos of this angle, then it will give us the length of the side which is adjacent to this angle. So this is mod z cos theta, and this is rightly our a in the a plus ib. And similarly for sin theta, it is mod z times sin theta. If you multiply by the hypotenuse by the sine of the angle, sine of an angle of right triangle, it will give you the length of the side that is opposite to the angle. So which is this? So this is mod z sin theta, but this is b. So there we have it. Mod z cos theta is A and mod z sin theta is B, and so we have this is equal to A plus IB, so that is equal to Z. So Z is mod Z into e power I theta. Again, there is a leap of faith that you have to take. That is in the having this result, e power I theta is cos theta plus I sin theta. But apart from that, I hope I've given you enough sense, given intuition to understand what this whole thing is about. Again, I encourage you to pause the video and try to look at it for different quadrants. You'll understand better. Yeah, but basically the fact is we are just trying to represent the complex number in terms of the modulus and its argument, because it is just another type of representation of the coordinate system. Yeah. From this, you can directly have a few really remarkable results. That is, just trying to do some operations on the complex numbers by writing it in this representation. So, say suppose you were to multiply two complex numbers z1 and z2. What could you say about the product? Of course, what could you say about the product would make sense only if I told you in what sense, in terms of what. So let's say in terms of the modulus and the argument. Just the modulus and the argument. So again, as I already told you, it is based on the representation we just learned. So let's say z1 as mod z1 into e power I theta 1 and z2 as mod z2 into e power I theta 2. So what does this mean? Let's try to simplify this. This becomes mod z1 mod z2 e power I theta 1 plus theta 2. A simple law of indices for the exponential. I hope you know this multiplication of exponents. So you get this. This can be written as, again, mod of z1 into mod of z2. This is an exercise to show. I haven't shown this as a property. Mod z1 times mod z2 is mod z1 z2 and e power I of some theta 1 plus theta 2. So this is a complex number of the form something mod into e power I something. So this is a complex number whose modulus is mod z1 z2 and whose argument is theta 1 plus theta 2. Let's try to use this information by looking at the graph. So suppose you were multiplying a number with a modulus 1, say mod z2 was just 1 and mod z1, say you're having 3 plus 4i and your z2 is I. Obviously the modulus of z2 is 1, right? So now we have 3 and 4i. What this result says is that the modulus of the product, okay, it's easy to multiply, but let's try to just visualize using the on the complex plane. So what it's saying is the modulus will be modulus of this thing into modulus of this I, so which is 1. So the modulus doesn't change in the result, in the product. So that says something. That says that the product will still be on this circle with radius as the modulus of z1. But it rotates by something. This vector, if you imagine this as okay, let's not say vector, this ray, if you may, rotates by some angle, which we will now find out. So it rotates by an extra angle. There is already an e power I theta 1, this is already theta 1. The new argument is theta 1 plus theta 2. But what is theta 2? What is the argument of I? What is the argument of I? I lies on the y-axis, right? I lies on the y-axis, so its argument is obviously just 90 degree. So this rotates by 90 degrees, so you just draw, and in the positive direction, not negative 90 degree, positive 90 degree. So you just draw or something that makes a right angle in the positive side. So there you have the product. So this is some way to interpret multiplication using this representation on the complex plane. You can do this for many things and find out more and more results. Especially this mod Z1, Z2, like if you keep the mod fixed, it will be on the circle and the angle is just getting added. You can try to make more sense of it. It's very intuitive concept. So now that we have that representation defined, let's just come back to the question which took us there, e power I pi. I'll leave it to you guys to justify how to arrive at the answer -1. But again, I'll just write some hints. E power I times pi with 1 as the modulus. Just look at it as a complex number and you will get the answer. Coming back, there was a very interesting thing that we were doing. Now let's just go back to our first lecture where the whole question was why we came with the set of complex numbers. We took the square root, right? And although there may be still many more operations that don't contain, but let's just address the question of square root. We took square root of -1 and there was no real number, and so we were all puzzled and had to extend and all. So that was the problem, right? Now do we still face the problem of taking square root in complex numbers? As I said, there needs to be a proof of the fact that polynomials, in the polynomials part of the lecture I told you that any complex polynomial has all the complex solutions. But let's just take this one specific part of taking square root because it's interesting. I mean, that question is something that bothered us from real numbers to go to complex numbers. So can we take the square root of a complex number? Say you have 1 plus I. How do you take the square root of something like 1 plus I? I'm especially addressing the question now because now we have the tool to do that. We know that we can write this as in the exponential form, which is way more easier because suppose you have a real number mod z times e to the something, then the square root of it will be just the square root of this thing, it's a real number and also positive real number, so it's very easy, times the square root of this thing, and square root of a power b is just a to the b by 2, right? This is just whole to the half. So again, that's also simple because what happens here is just that, again, let's just look at it in a very specific case, like 1 plus I. That way we'll understand better. So what is the modulus of 1 plus I? Square root of 1 square plus 1 square, that's root 2. Simple. Now we want to look at, find the argument. I'll just go with a picture, although you can find it, I haven't given you the trigonometric way to find it, but I told you can extend it by using tan for those who know trigonometry. So 1 plus I, it's very simple, this is 1, this is also 1, 1. So it's an isosceles triangle. So this angle equal to this angle, you can easily find it to be 45 degrees. So something, doesn't matter, even if it is theta it was okay, but even if you didn't know, but in this example this is 45 degrees. So that is pi over 4, I guess. So you can write this 1 plus I as root 2 times e to the I pi by 4. Great. Now we want to take the square root of this. Take the square root of this. This will give us root of root 2, that is 2 to the 1 by 4 times e to the pi by 8. Okay, this is just the modulus, so that's okay. But e to the pi by 8 computing will be rather hard because for those who don't know trigonometry, because again e to the pi by 8 we will use that formula, that was e to the pi theta is cos theta plus I sin theta. So e to the pi by 8 will be cos pi by 8 plus I sin pi by 8. Both of these are real numbers, so they'll exist. Again, you need to know trigonometry. So cos pi by 8 plus I sin by 8. sine pi by 8. So 2 to the 1 by 4 times this thing. So this is a complex number, and again our problem is solved. That is, the square root of 1 plus I exists as a complex number. While taking square roots, cube roots, and many other answers in that endeavor, there is one very interesting number that pops up. That is the cube root of unity. You may have heard it somewhere. It's a very interesting topic that we'll be discussing now. Cube roots of unity is interesting for a very particular reason. First of all, what do I mean? Let's go slow. So suppose you have this equation, z cube equal to 1. You have to solve this now, right? Suppose you were to solve this. How would you solve this? You obviously have one answer at first, z equal to 1. That's it, right? I mean, is there anything else to solve for? Yes, now that we have complex numbers, we will go further. We will try to find the other roots, because now that we know that they exist. So how do we do that? Simple algebra. Bring everything on one side, and then you have to factorize this in a linear fashion, so that all the factors are linear with the roots in them. In this case, it's easy, or maybe because I've seen, but it's not hard. You can try yourself also. If you factorize this using the a cube minus b cube identity, you get it as z minus 1 into z square plus z plus 1 equal to 0. So either this is 0 or this is 0. If z minus 1 is 0, then we get the obvious solution that we thought of initially, that is z equal to 1. In the case that z square plus z plus 1 equal to 0, we have a quadratic to solve. Right? What solutions? What are the solutions to this quadratic? Let's just use the quadratic formula. It will be simpler. So minus b plus or minus square root of b square minus 4ac by 2a. This is equal to minus 1 plus or minus root 3 by 2. Wow, that popped out of nowhere. Minus root 3. That popped out of nowhere. So, how do we make sense of this now, and why is it special? Is the next question. First of all, we know we can write square root of minus 3 as I root 3. So minus 1 plus or minus I root 3 by 2. These are the two other solutions to the cube roots of unity. Why is this special? Is the next question. First of all, we will try to solve this in a different way, in a rather complicated way, because this was very simple. I mean, it's just factorization and solving of quadratic. But now that we know that we can write a complex number in the exponential form and then take roots by just dividing the angle by 3 in the argument by 3 or whatever, like we did in the previous one. We just divided pi by 4 by 2. Let's just try it in that way to see whether it's special in some way. I'll just write the three solutions of this equation over here that we found. 1 minus 1 plus root 3i by 2 and minus 1 minus root 3i by 2. Those three solutions that we found. Now let's try it in the way using exponential representation of 1. So suppose z is a complex number whose cube is 1. Let's just write it as mod z into e to the I theta. Z is equal to mod z into e to the I theta. For z cube to be equal to 1, mod z cube, which is cube on both sides and equated to 1, mod z cube into e to the I 3 theta must be equal to 1. But 1, as we know, it lies over here, has a modulus 1 and an argument 0 or 2 pi if you may. So that's the trick here. We are trying to look at 0, the theta 0 or 2 pi. So 1 is 1 times e to the 0 or e to the I 2 pi. You can make sense of this from the fact that e power I pi is equal to minus 1. because theta differs by 2 pi, even if you rotate it by 2 pi, it's still the same, right? So we're using that fact. So e to the I pi is minus 1, you square on both sides, you get e to the I2 pi is 1. So we are writing 1 this way. You can write it in many ways. E to the I4 pi is also 1, and so on. There are many ways in which you can write. But okay, coming back, mod z cube should be equal to 1 into e to the I, all these numbers that are possible. That is 2n pi. Right, if you just look at it, where n belongs to the set of 4 numbers. It could be 0, 2, 4 or anything. Okay, so now we have to equate the real parts and the imaginary part. That is something we used to do till now in the Cartesian representation. But in the exponential representations, you can just equate the moduli and the arguments. So that's what we will do here. Mod z cube must be equal to 1. Mod z cube must be equal to 1. For this we have just one solution, because here mod z is real. So mod z must be 1. So this is equal to 1. Now we have by equating the other part, that is the exponential part, e power I 3 theta as e power I times 2 and 2 pi n. Okay, I'll just clear this up, it's getting messy. What do we have? We have e to the I 3 theta is e to the I 2 n pi. That means theta can take any value of the form 2n pi by 3, because anytime you multiply by 3 you get a number which is of the form 2n pi and it satisfies the equation. So theta can be any angle of the form 2n pi by 3, right? Yes, because again, as I said, it just satisfies the equation. So what does it mean to say that theta can be any number of the form 2n pi by 3 on the complex plane? Let's just take some values. If you put theta as 0, you will just get z equal to 1, the first solution. So for n equal to 0, you get z equal to 1, the first solution. If you put theta equal to n equal to 1, you will get mod z equal to mod z, which is 1, into e to the I 2 and 2 pi by 3. Now, if you know trigonometry, this will be equal to cos theta, cos 2 pi by 3 plus I sin 2 pi by 3, using the formula that I mentioned previously. So cos 2 pi by 3 will be minus half, and sin 2 pi by 3 will be root 3 by 2. So you will get plus I root 3 by 2, which is the second solution. So you will get z equal to minus 1 plus root 3I by 2. Next value of n equal to 2, you will get z, again if you just substitute the trigonometric values, you will get the third solution. I'll leave that for you people to do. So that way we have the 3 solutions. Now you may point out we could go on 3, 4 and so on. If you notice, I'll leave that to you again, for those who know trigonometry. If you compute, you will just keep getting the same solutions. Okay, but what is so special about this? Z equal to 1, if you say, and that lies over here. Let's just plot it on the complex plane, all the 3 roots. And for argument 2 pi by 3, 120 degree, 2 pi by 3 is in degrees. So again it lies over here, again with the modulus 1, and 4 pi by 3 is 240 degrees, which makes an angle 120 degree with this, and again 120 degree with this, has a modulus 1 again. This is the third root with the modulus 1. So it lies on the circle, making this nice shape. 3 roots on a circle making 120 degrees each from each other. There are a lot of properties that you can have with this, and a lot of algebraic identities that you can use this to make sense of and solve problems. So that we will be looking at in the next lecture. This is just an introduction to the cube roots of unity. Yeah, again, these three complex numbers are called the cube roots of unity.